first here. Okay.
Do a countdown so I know. 3, 2, 1.
Just a second. Okay, yeah. 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna let people in right now.
Okay, we are recording, Tony?
We are. Yeah.
Hello to everybody. Welcome to Madrid Singularity. We are streaming live from Madrid to the rest of the world. We are very happy on this event that will be in English with translation into Spanish. And we are going to be talking about cryonics. Actually, we are very happy that Madrid Singularity is the second largest group in Meetup about the singularity and the first about cryonics, according to Meetup, in the world. We have been doing many events, including the first one in English a few days ago with Aubrey de Grey talking about longevity. And today we are going to be talking about cryonics with 3 of the leading world experts from 3 different parts of the world, from the USA, from Europe, and from Australia. And we will continue doing events, but mostly in Spanish. And we support other events in Spanish, like the Longevity Congress that will be held in a few days in Latin America. And then we will have another Madrid meetup about longevity in Spanish on March 12th, and another one on cryonics in Spanish on April 2nd. This will be about cryonics in Spanish with 3 leading experts from the Spanish-speaking world, from Argentina, from Spain, from the USA, but in Spanish. And so this is where we come back to cryonics, to this event. We will have 3 speakers. Max Moore, connecting from California, well, from the USA, from Arizona. So for him, I believe it is 8 a.m. Then Emil Kendziorra, he's going to be connecting from Berlin. He will also talk for about 15 to 20 minutes. And we will finish in Australia with Peter Tsolakides, and he will be talking about the new facility in Australia. Let me put this briefly in context, which is what I call Plan B. Plan B is cryonics, because Plan A is longevity, radical lifespan, even immortality, as I like to say. And I talk about in my book with my fantastic co-author, David Wood. In The Death of Death, we talk about Plan A, longevity, immortality, and Plan B, cryonics. Cryonics has been growing for over half a century when it was basically impossible, but everything is impossible until it becomes possible. And now we have millions of humans who have been cryopreserved as embryos, eggs, or sperm. So 8 million humans, it is estimated, have been already cryopreserved as very small human beings. And now cryonics should take over from burial or cremation, because burial or cremation after you die destroy you, you disappear. But with cryonics, you actually have an opportunity to come back to life in the future. We have been supporting a petition about cryonics for the European Parliament. One of our members in Spain has been pushing for this petition at the European level. And we are helping with translations also into Spanish. This very good article written by Ben Best, that I believe is connected here with us now. Ben Best wrote this fantastic overview of cryonics, where he talks about the different facilities, beginning with some of the oldest, like American Cryonic Society, Alcor Life Extension Foundation. And then he closes in the year 2016 with Yinfen in China. But in 2016, there were not 2 important organizations that are with us today. Tomorrow, Biostasis in Europe and Southern Cryonics in Australia. These are newer, but they are very important institutions that are just beginning. Ben Best does this comparison about the different types of procedures and the storage, perfusion, etc., and also how many members they have and how many patients they have, all these different institutions. This would be nice to be updated, to have up-to-date information. Also, some institutions do whole body or neuro preservation. So we will hear about this also from our experts and how much it costs. You know, also for neuropreservation or for full body preservation. Cryonics Institute has a big database with older members, including many people from Latin America, from Mexico, Costa Rica, Brazil, Argentina, Spain, Portugal. The same with Alcor Life Extension, including people from Argentina, from Spain. In fact, we like to say that we have 3.5 Spanish people in cryonic suspension. It is 3.5 because the other half is French. It is a Spanish-French case, plus 3 fully Spanish, even though one also is accounted as Australian, but they are Spanish. And we had 2 cats cryopreserved last year. I actually managed with some friend the first cryopreservation in continental Spain in 2016. And I repeat, now we have 3.5 humans, a Spanish and half a Frenchman, and 2 cats. In the next activity about cryonics, we will also have Maria Entraigues that will be talking about the first Latin American case that was her mother, who is now in Alcor in Arizona. But also, as I mentioned, we have an institution in China, Shandong, that already has a dozen patients, even though it's the most expensive institution for cryonics. But we have new facilities opening in Europe, tomorrow Biostasis, in Australia, Southern Cryonics, and we have been pushing for this in Spain. We just had a cryonics first response, or also Biostasis first response, talking about cryonics. And we have several experts. In fact, Emil Kendziorra, who will be speaking with us, and Ben Best, who is connected among our audience also, besides Peter and Max, who also spoke virtually. We support the Scientist Open Letter on Cryonics, and we support all the writing about how to pay also for cryonics, like this fantastic book by Rudy Hoffman called The Affordable Immortal, that we have translated in Spanish. And we already have 2 editions of this book in Spanish. We are very happy that we are making to promote these ideas in the Spanish-speaking world. And when Alcor celebrated the 50th anniversary in New York City last February, I went there and they published a new book, Cryostasis Revival. Cryostasis Revival basically explains how nanotechnology will help us to revive, to reanimate people in the future. And I am there in this picture with Max Moore and with Natasha Vitamur, who even did the cover of the book, a fantastic book that you can download for free at the Alcor Life Extension Foundation website. And with that, I just want to talk about cryonics with my friends here. Forget about burials, forget about cremation. Let's move into cryonics. And for that, let's begin with Max Moore. Max Moore is a longtime friend. I am so happy and so proud to have known Max Moore for since the beginning of this millennium, or the end of last millennium, about the year 2000. Actually, he created Alcor in the United Kingdom when he was a student in the United Kingdom before moving to the USA. He was already pushing for cryonics in England in the 1980s. So Max Moore has been a pioneer in England, in the USA. He was president for many years of Alcor Life Extension Foundation. And he is now in a new capability, also working on cryonics. So Max, please go ahead, share your presentation, and it is all up to you. We want to learn so much from you, one of the leaders in this field for all of us.
Thank you, Jose. See, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, well, my job here is to give a bit of an introduction. I'm not entirely sure how much each person here knows, so be my perspective on this idea. This is actually an adaptation of a presentation I've given to non-cryonicists. So the technology of life, how cryonics enables you to live as long as you choose. I chose that title because I put cryonics or biostasis more generally in the context of anti-aging. The whole point of cryonics is that we like living and we want more life. So other methods may not work. Let me start my timer here. Other methods may not work. I argued recently that actually, rather than plan B, you should really think of cryonics as plan A, especially if you're not that young, but even if you're not, because you never know what's going to happen. And I've personally been optimistic about life extension research for over 30 years. And now I am just started my 60th year, and I'm not seeing any actual real actionable progress. So those of you who think, oh, but it's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, well, don't be too sure about that. Make sure you have your cryonics plan in place, first of all. So as I put in this slide here, I suggest that you think of this a bit like a financial investment. When you're managing your money, you want to have different pots of money. You want to have an emergency fund, so money that you can live on for a number of months. If you suddenly lose your job, it's a good idea to have that, or for medical emergencies. Then you want some other fairly conservative investments that you can rely on, and then you want some more aggressive investments that will grow over time. So I think you can think of exercise and diet as part of that portfolio of life extension options, the kind of the conservative ones that actually will stop you dying earlier. And then cryonics should be part of that portfolio. There are other experimental things you might try, but again, nothing that seems to work drastically well right now. So cryonics, I think, should be a definite, actually should be your emergency fund in a sense, because it is for emergencies. We hope not to ever need to be cryopreserved, but obviously better than the alternative, as Jose pointed out. So that should really be your emergency fund. Get that in place first, is my suggestion. Also, there's a lot of commonalities between cryonics and life extension in general. It's not something, cryonics is not something isolated from the rest of the life extension field. We're going to need to have advances in regenerative medicine, for instance. So it's very important to keep an eye on advances such as we have here in 2016, stem cells able to grow new human eyes, helping stroke victims walk again, helping paralysis victims. These things are obviously very relevant to reviving patients in the future. The whole area of regenerative medicine, nanomedicine, which is really mostly in the design stage right now, not something we can really build at this point, and other technologies that help people recover from extremely bad conditions. Because it's not just a matter of getting people cryopreserved and bring them back in the future. It's actually a lot more complicated depending on the circumstances under which your body gives out on you. So advances in resuscitation medicine are of extreme relevance to cryonics. We want to be able to restart your body after clinical death or legal death, restart you without doing any damage or as little damage as possible. So advances in regenerative medicine and resuscitative medicine are very important to us as well, and very relevant. So don't think of cryonics as this isolated thing that exists on its own. It's really part of the broader field. So as I'm suggesting, we have this idea of longevity escape velocity, which is the point at which advances in life extension get faster and faster. So you're gaining 3 months per year, 6 months per year, and eventually you're gaining more years than you're losing. So potentially you won't die, at least not of age. But how far off is that point? Well, we don't really know. Again, I've said I've been expecting this. I expected by now we would have reached that point, but we haven't. What about accidents? Even if you're very healthy, you can have an accident. Natural disasters, we've seen some pretty awful ones just recently, homicide, incurable diseases. So I would suggest, again, making cryonics your plan A. Now, in presenting cryonics as part of the life extension field, I'd also suggest that it can be seen as an extension of emergency medicine. Just as in the past, well, let's put it this way. When you have, say, a cardiac event or something, or a stroke or something bad goes wrong, hopefully you'll be found quickly, and they'll take you from wherever that happened across space to a place like a hospital or a clinic where they have more capability to help you. Cryonics or biostasis is a similar idea, except we're going to take you from one time to a future time where there's more capability. So in both cases, we're taking you from a place where we can't do much to help you to a place with greater capabilities. In the case of cryonics or biostasis, it's a place in the future where we have much more advanced capabilities. So again, I think of cryonics as an extension of emergency medicine. It's not part of the funeral industry. It's not about doing anything with dead bodies. It's about stopping people from deteriorating when they've had a major physiological event. Now, one point I want to make again for people who may not be very deep into cryonics yet, it's very important to understand that when we talk about somebody, we may loosely say someone has died and has to be cryopreserved, but they're not really dead. It's important to understand these different concepts of death. There is the idea of clinical death, which is simply the ending of the heartbeat and respiration. So no pulse, no respiration, you're clinically dead. Now, in the past, before about 1960 or so, that would be the same as just death, because there's really, at least in practical terms, because there's nothing we could do, we couldn't help the person. Today, obviously, that's not true. We've invented cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, defibrillation, where we can shock the heart, many other methods of restoring someone to life and function. So someone today can be clinically dead, but not really dead. So they're not declared legally dead. Legal death, again, is not really true death. Legal death is simply the point at which the doctor says, I don't know what else I can do for this patient. I could perhaps actually revive them temporarily, but they're going to be pretty miserable because they're choking on fluid in their lungs, or they're in extreme pain, or they're going to, the body will fail again in another few minutes or hours, so why bother? So it's kind of a fuzzy line. It's not even necessarily a clear line. They could perhaps revive you, but they may have a do not resuscitate order. So legal death is really just a matter of a decision made by a doctor based on current medical capabilities, saying there's really nothing more I can do. Either I can't revive this person, or it's really rather pointless, so I'm going to call death. In fact, that's what they say in the United States. We call it. That's basically where you give up on trying to resuscitate someone. But clearly, at that point, you're clinically dead, you're legally dead, but you're not biologically dead. And even that's not the ultimate kind of death, but maybe I won't go into that too much. But clearly, you're not completely dead, because if you were, you couldn't donate your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, or other organs. So almost everything is still actually alive. Pretty much all the cells are alive, and most importantly, in the brain. And I can't really go too much into this, maybe in the question period, but this idea that the brain dies right away within a few minutes of legal death is really pretty inaccurate. It can actually be revived after long periods of time with no oxygen. I've got a case here, which is actually not the record, but there's a famous case in Sweden, Anna Bagenholm, who was in a skiing accident, trapped under a layer of ice for about 80 minutes in freezing water. Now, it's not clear exactly how long she was unable to breathe, but it was probably something close to an hour. And she arrived at the hospital at 13.7 degrees C, very cold. And of course, it's the same principle as in cryonics, that the colder you are, the slower your metabolism is running, and so the less damage is being done. In fact, we have something in cryonics called the Q10 law, which simply means that for every 10 degrees Celsius you drop in temperature, your metabolic rate halves. So if you drop 30 degrees, you've got 3 halvings, so obviously half, quarter, 1/8. So you slowed down almost 90%. So that enables you to survive a lot longer than somebody at room temperature. And again, that's not actually the record. I'll have to add the record to the slide. So that's the basic idea is you're not gone when you're declared clinically dead or even legally dead. You're not gone, you're not beyond help. And it's really our responsibility to help the person survive into the future where they can be fixed up. So I like to sometimes call cryopreservation the third state. We all know about life because we're walking around and we're living, we're metabolizing, things are happening. We know death, or at least we think we do, if you don't understand it that well. In true death, you're gone forever, permanently, that's the end. You're totally screwed. But in between, there is this state we call biostasis, where, as you can see, biologically, you're static, nothing is changing. And cryonics is one form of biostasis. In fact, back in 1986, Eric Drexler, the guy who really created nanotechnology, he preferred the term biostasis to cryonics, and some cryonicists are using that term. And I think maybe actually it's a better term than cryonics in some ways. It's not exactly the same thing. In principle, there are other ways of achieving biostasis other than cryonics, or even in combination with it. For instance, you can use chemical preservation, chemical fixation to prevent deterioration of the cells. So that's a form of biostasis that's not cryonics or cryostasis. There's also possibilities of combining them. And maybe in the question period, if we have time, we could address ways in which you could combine those, which would be a good thing to do in certain circumstances. So people have a hard time with this because they tend to be very binary. You're alive or you're dead, and dead is dead. Well, no, there's different kinds of death, as we've seen, and there's this in-between state that we hope to achieve, where we've stopped you from deteriorating, we've stopped you getting worse, and we can take you into the future one day at a time to a point where we have means of helping you and resuscitating you. So very briefly, because again, I'm not sure how much people are familiar with this, I just want to very briefly present the cryopreservation process. And there's different variations of this depending on the situation, but this is the basic idea. In a decent case where we have a little bit of warning, we will send out a team to the patient's bedside, the hospital or hospice where they are, and they will stand by. That's why it's called a standby team. They literally stand by and wait. I know in the case of Alcor, we've done standbys as long as 3 weeks, which is a very long and exhausting time. But usually it's a few hours or a few days until the doctor declares legal death. At that point, you go into the stabilization phase, where essentially we're going to move you from the hospital bed to an ice bath, start external cooling. Maybe in the future we can do internal cooling. That's something that's under development. But the idea is to reduce body temperature as rapidly as possible, though not yet below the freezing point, because we haven't protected the cells yet. So we're stabilizing the body by cooling, circulating the icy water around the patient, because we want to get the brain cooling as well, and because we want to circulate a series of medications. Typically, in our current protocol, that starts with propofol. That slows down metabolism, which is what we want. We don't want metabolism running fast and deteriorating rapidly. It also prevents any possibility of becoming aware of what's going on. Just because you're declared dead doesn't mean that you couldn't actually return to some level of consciousness. So that stops that happening. Other things to maintain blood pressure, to prevent blood clots, and so on. So there's a whole actually several years of research has gone into these medications to keep improving them and see which ones work the best. The next stage is transport, where we're going to have to transport you from wherever this happened to you, which could be a mile from your cryonics organization. It could be 5,000 miles from your cryonics organization. That's where I think it's very important. I'll be discussing this with Peter and Emil. It's very important to start thinking about having agreements between cryonics organizations, because you may be traveling between the US and Europe and Australia, and it's a long way to go for your cryonics organization. So if you have a more local team that can help you, that would obviously be a much better solution. So transport can happen if it's nearby in an emergency vehicle, essentially a customized ambulance, or you can, more commonly in most cases, at a long distance, we'll put someone on a plane and fly them to the cryonics organization. And we really want to get the person there as quickly as possible. In a local case, we can actually do it very rapidly. I'm thinking of one case at Alcor. I think our record was from the point at which someone was declared legally dead, moving the patient, cooling them, giving the medications, transporting them, and getting to Alcor. It was about 35 minutes. I think that's our record, and that's actually faster than we need, because then you have to wait for a while to cool the patient before you begin the surgery. In other cases, it can be hours. You don't want to go days, because it gets worse and worse the more time that goes past. Again, there's some complications I won't go into just now. There may be new methods of cooling people further in the field and protecting the cells, what we call cryoprotective perfusion. That may be possible to do in the field. In fact, we already are doing that in some cases for patients who are just neuro, preserving the brain. So that point, the perfusion, the idea of that is we want to take out all this fluid from the body. We're basically a big bag of water, largely water. And water, of course, will freeze, form ice crystals, which is highly damaging. Contrary to what a lot of people would have you believe, that doesn't mean that ice forms inside the cells and expands and blows them to smithereens. That's not what actually happens. The cells will dehydrate and ice will form between the cells. And yes, it will do some damage, but it's not going to completely destroy them. Most of the damage is actually done by the concentration of the chemicals in the cells going up and becoming in the wrong proportions. So what we want to do is to remove as much blood either in the field, where you are, or at the cryonics organization, and replace it with a cryoprotectant solution. Now, I think my friend Aaron Drake was the first person to describe it as a medical grade antifreeze, which is a very handy, simplified way of explaining what's in it. The cryoprotective solution will allow you to go below the freezing point without forming any ice crystals. So there'll be much less damage done to the cells. Now, this isn't a perfect process. There are very few cases so far where we've seen good evidence of complete cryoprotection, but we can get varying degrees of it, and obviously the more of it we can do, the better. I guess I should have skipped onto this. So, that was the deployment standby stage, stabilization, which I discussed. Cryoprotected perfusion, you don't have to worry about this formula. This is just there for the chemists. That's the formula that is used for our cryoprotectant perfusion. The challenge with the cryoprotectant is to have a very effective ice suppressant, which is not terribly toxic to the cells. There's actually something of a trade-off between the degree of toxicity and how effective they are in preventing ice formation. So M22 is one of the solutions used that seems to have a pretty good trade-off. It may not be the best possible. There may be something better in the future. That's still something that can benefit from further research. But once that's been done, once we've removed the fluids and cryoprotected the cells, we'll then go to the cryogenic cool down, which initially will be very rapid. We're going to plunge the temperature very quickly to about minus 90 degrees Celsius or so. And then we're going to slow down a little bit because the cells will, different parts of the body will contract at different rates, and you don't want fracturing to occur. So we're going to go down 1 degree C per hour or so. So it takes a little bit longer to reach the final temperature at minus 196 degrees Celsius. And what we hope to end up with, as we see in this slide, on the left is frozen tissue, on the right vitrified tissue. Now with the cryoprotectant solution we use, if we can get in a sufficient concentration, we will not freeze the tissue, we will vitrify it. And vitrification, it comes from the Latin word meaning glass. And that's because the solution, once you've supercooled it, will become thicker and thicker and form a kind of a glassy resinous block that holds everything in place without any internal structure. So what is the scientific backing for cryonics? Is this just a big wish, a big hope? Well, no, there's a lot of scientific backing for it. For the first paper here, persistence of long-term memory and vitrified and revived C. elegans, a little tiny microscopic worm, Natasha Vita-Moore and colleagues were able to demonstrate for the first time the preservation of a form of memory through cryopreservation in a simple organism. That was a very powerful result that needs to be built upon. There are other studies here, aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation, which is a combination of chemical preservation with cryopreservation, as I mentioned, that produce amazingly good results under electron microscope studies. You could see very good preservation of cell structure. Everything we know about the preservation of memory, which is obviously not complete today, but it's pretty good, seem to be very well preserved in these studies. As someone says, every neuron and synapse look beautifully preserved across the entire brain. Simply amazing, given that I held in my hand this very same brain when it was a vitrified glassy solid. We're also seeing progress in nanotechnology. Medical nanotechnology, I think, is very likely to be needed for almost all cryonics patients, at least the ones we have so far. And in 2016, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded for the design and synthesis of molecular machines. So that's just beginning. And as Jose pointed out, we published a book last year, Cryostasis Revival, by Robert Freitas, which you can get free. It's a pretty dense book, but I recommend at least skimming through it. It's a very well thought out idea of how you could actually revive people in the future. So there's really a lot of evidence. I'm not going to try to summarize that because there's a lot of it, but if you think about it right now, we're actually in cryonics or biostasis, we're doing things that interest people in other fields. NASA and other space groups are very interested in being able to slow down metabolism and cause a form of human hibernation because you use far fewer resources in space, lots of oxygen and food and so on. That's not quite the same as what we're doing, but it's along in the same lines. The military are interested in something similar because they want to be able to take soldiers on the battlefield who are quite a long way from medical help and be able to slow down everything and preserve them to get them to some further help. So it's not just us doing this. Other people are interested in doing the same kind of thing. So this one probably don't need to do so much because Jose kind of mentioned this, but some of the organizations, the Alpha Life Extension Foundation that I joined back in 1986, and as Jose mentioned, I created a branch of this at the UK back then. Cryonics Institute's been around for almost as long, since 1976. Tomorrow Biostasis, Emil will tell you about that, a really sound and strong new organization in Europe, which I think is going to do very well. Southern Cryonics, as Peter will tell you about, is a very new organization, just starting operations. Biostasis Technologies is a very new organization that I'm starting on March 1st, and you'll be hearing more about that. Basically, it's an organization to support research and to improve standards in cryonics for all organizations. And then you have the various organizations that provide services like Suspended Animation and ICE, which do the standby services. Resurgence Biomedical and Resurgence Medical, also very new organizations together with Biostasis, trying to improve standby and the science of cryonics. So that's pretty much my overview of this. I would suggest that you think of cryonics again as an extension of emergency medicine and as true life insurance. If you think about it, life insurance is actually death insurance. They pay out on death. We're actually insuring your life here with cryonics. So put that safety belt on, make your cryonics arrangements now, and hopefully we'll see you in the future and we can see how the future works out. So that's it for me. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you so much, Max. That has been a fantastic overview of cryonics, and also you have so much experience and for so long that we are really pleased to have you with us, and also for the questions at the end. People can begin putting the questions in the chat in either Zoom or in the YouTube channel, in English or in Spanish. And now let's proceed with Dr. Emil Kendziorra. Dr. Emil Kendziorra is a medical doctor. He really is a medical doctor who studied in Germany. He lives in Berlin. He has been involved in several startup companies. And then he realized that longevity escape velocity might not be so close. And therefore, we need to move into plan B, which might be plan A, cryonics. And so he started with other friends, the European Biostasis Foundation and Tomorrow Biostasis. He has done incredible work. I have visited the operations in near Zurich, north of Zurich. Is a fantastic, fantastic place. So Emil, we want to hear from you, please. Take it away and take us to Germany and to Switzerland and to the future.
Well, thank you so much, Jose, for the kind introduction and for inviting me in the first place. Welcome everybody who's in the call as well, either in Spanish or in English. I'll quickly give you an introduction of what we're doing at Tomorrow Bio, here based in Berlin, in Germany, and at the European Biostasis Foundation based in Switzerland. These are the two organizations that I'm running, one a non-profit foundation and the other one a day-to-day operative organization for cryopreservation. And of course, I already said, please feel free to ask any question in the chat, and then I'm more than happy to answer questions in the end. So Tomorrow Bio was set up primarily, and so was the European Biostasis Foundation, to push forward science that is more on the European Biostasis Foundation side and provide comprehensive, good cryopreservations in Europe. So most of people in the call probably are going to be from Europe, I guess. Currently, we are primarily focused on Europe, but we're more and more going into US as well, and actually will launch in 4 metropolitan areas in the US as well. So Tomorrow Bio basically starts with a relatively simple sign-up process. So if anybody is interested in signing up, feel free to go to Tomorrow Bio. In fact, the whole page also exists in Spanish. Get to know the topic of cryopreservation better. And then if you should so choose to, more than happy to have a call with you, either in English. We also have Spanish-speaking people in the company. So have a call with us. And then once you've really learned what the ins and outs of the topic and can make an informed decision, then you might be interested in signing up. Now, as Max said in his presentation, the costs of cryopreservation are relatively expensive, right? Depending on if the whole body or just the brain is being cryopreserved. These are the 2 options that we offer. Can be 200,000 euros for whole bodies, or around 50 to 60,000 for brain only. Of course, that is a large amount of money. So we're directly collaborating with a large insurance provider that if people choose to sign up, who are relatively young and relatively healthy, and you can take out life insurance, either term life insurance or whole life insurance, or a combination of both, to then make those cryopreservation plans fundable. So this is always the first step. So please reach out to us if this is a topic you would like to learn more about. Now, the second step would be that should something happen to you ever, then we're dispatching one of our medical teams to you. We currently, as I said, are based in Europe. We're collaborating with one team here. The pictures you see on the bottom of the screen, this is the team that is based here in Berlin. We have these mobile ambulances that are retrofitted, well, ambulances that are now practically mobile operating rooms where the whole procedure, the whole cryoprotection procedure can be done on site to not lose any time. This one is the Berlin one. We're currently setting up a second one in close to Zurich in Switzerland, and we're partnering with a group in the Netherlands to kind of cover Central Europe, and then, as you can see, basically all of Europe with these teams. And those teams would always be dispatched to wherever you are. And now, I said it before, if you're in the greater New York area, Southern Florida, around Miami, Portland, Seattle, or Bay Area, San Francisco, then those regions would also be covered. You can sign up for pre-launch already. We're not fully ready there yet, but we're coming to those regions. So go to tomorrow.bio/USA to sign up for our pre-launch if you're interested in that. So this medical part is always the second part, right? This is where the highest difference in quality is determined, right? All this medical part needs to be quite fast. If you do it slow, there's a lot of damage or due to ischemia, which means the time that the tissue, the brain, most importantly, is not supplied with oxygen. And of course, you want to reduce that time as much as possible. And at the end of the presentation, I have a couple of slides quickly, calling everybody to action who's from Spain to help us build a local team in Spain. But we have a few more slides on that at the end of the presentation. Now, once you're then cryopreserved, you would be transported in Europe, in our case, to this institute, which is our research institute based in Switzerland, which is both a lab, so biomedical research is being done, but it's also a long-term storage facility for cryopreserved patients. And in fact, the cryopreserved patients are stored underground here. You can't see it. It's kind of, behind the building in the back, on the lower level, which is underground for some additional safety and security. Even though, of course, Switzerland is already a pretty safe country, so probably not that important. And just to give you a bit of an impression, this building in the inside is on the right side. You see one of our labs there. On the left, you see the operating room, which also has a CT scanner, which is being used to ensure quality or do quality assurance. Making sure that your teams provide good quality is, of course, of utmost importance. And CT scans are one way how you, after a case has been performed, you can ensure that the preservation was done well and no ice crystals or only very little ice crystals have formed. Now, I already briefly alluded to it. Signing up for cryopreservation always has kind of these two parts. One is a membership fee, a membership with Tomorrow Bio. This is in our case 25 euros per month, right? That pays to keep the medical teams on standby, to keep them trained, right? And all of the things that are not directly related to one cryopreservation case. And now, if one of our members dies or someone who wants to be cryopreserved, then at that point, those 200,000 for whole body or 50 to 60,000 for brain-only preservation, that amount of money is then necessary at that point. And as I already said, term life insurance or whole life insurance are the most common ways to fund it. There's also a range of alternative funding methods. If you want to do it in a different way, that is possible. Just reach out to us, and I'm more than happy to tell you more about those. Now, switching a bit over to where I think what the most important part of the whole cryopreservation case is, or the whole cryopreservation kind of process is. You've seen this building. Of course, this looks impressive and nice, but this is not actually where the complexity lies. Neither in all this, signing up and insurance and funding it. There's some complexity there, but this is also not where the main complexity lies. The main complexity really lies in what is called SST, standby, stabilization, and transport. And arguably, there might be kind of a first aid thing before that. So this is where the largest, where it is being determined if a cryopreservation case is being done with high quality or with lower quality. So standby stabilization and transport, this is something we do, right? This is why we have these ambulances. They're being dispatched. They can stand by. They can wait around, be it days, be it weeks, doesn't really matter. Well, not many weeks, but a couple of weeks is possible. Stabilization would then be the cool down, all the medical procedures, stuff what Max already briefly discussed about. Then in our case, the perfusion with a cryoprotective agent on site, and then transferred to the organization. Now, Europe, of course, is not super big, but to do good emergency response, it is too big. So we have multiple teams, multiple of these ambulances, as I said before. But then again, if someone dies without any advance notice, then there's still going to be a good amount of hours until we arrive at wherever the patient is. So we have started for this first aid and standby part. We have started to build collaborations with local organizations. That those might be individual people almost, usually not one, but if it's 1, 2, or 3 people, or in some countries, of course, there are existing, volunteer organization or associations that can help to provide this, this fast initial response. So, of course, it's quite difficult for them to do very complex perfusion, for example, but the initial cool down can very well be done if there's someone who's motivated about the topic. And of course, we're more than happy to train them and support in any way we can. Now, it's really, this part is really important, right? Because otherwise, if someone dies and there is a lot of delay, then there will be too much time where the brain is not supplied with oxygen sufficiently, which then leads to ischemia, which leads to perfusion impairment. Basically, you're not able to put the cryopreservation agent in well, and which then leads to ice formation. So this is kind of my call to action that I briefly mentioned in the beginning. If any of you from Spain or from some other country who we haven't talked to yet is interested in, helping to build a local capabilities, local first aid capabilities, then we're more than happy to help, to support, to even fund, and so on, which would include basically everything that is kind of in this blue circle here. In Germany, it's not that important, but in the regions, in all the further regions of Europe, be it Italy, even though we're already talking to people there, Spain, Portugal, the Nordics, it's really important to get that done. As I said, we support, so you kind of would have these emergency kits. This is one of our first aid emergency kits, where of course you can't do everything with, but you can do an initial cool down, at least give some medication. Then if it gets a bit more advanced, we have these advanced first aid kits, which include chest compression devices as well, which then bridges the time until a more professional team is on the way or has arrived. And it would does tremendously improve the quality of a preservation case. So if you want good preservation where you are, unfortunately for now, it's not yet enough to just rely on an organization, just sign up and say, hey, listen, this is all I need to do. There's some amount of involvement required, either by getting involved, hands-on, or by making the choice that if you have a terminal disease at some point, hopefully not for long, not until a very long time, to move closer to an organization. We also, of course, do legal support on site and so on. So there's a lot of range of supports. This is, for example, an example of a database from one of the German states, but we do those kind of legal, what is allowed for every country in Europe. So the call to action is, I'm looking for people in this call for Spain, but if there's anybody else from another country who is interested, then of course, more than welcome to discuss as well. The important part is that one person from a country drives this topic forward, right? It takes responsibility. Of course, together with us, we're helping, but there needs to be a local, first contact person that brings intrinsic motivation, that brings a bit of tenacity, and so on. So please do, let's do this. And now two more quick, announcements. We're starting together with the DAO, with the crypto ecosystem. Together, we're starting CryoDAO. If you're interested in these kinds of things, check out us on Discord. Join our Discord at CryoDAO, or check us out at cryodao.org. This is an initiative which is there to fund basic science, basically science that would otherwise have a very hard time getting funded. From research projects like rewarming. This is one project that we're doing together, or planning to do together with Ramon Risco at the University of Seville. The first part of that is already committed, and but also other projects. Basically, everything that helps make cryopreservation better, but would have a hard time getting funded otherwise. Yeah. Now, last but not least, this is kind of what we're doing here in Europe. If you're interested in signing up, reach out to us at tomorrow.bio. If you're interested in getting more hands-on involved and would like to be a local contact, reach out to us as well. And if either of these options is interesting to us, scan the QR code that you see down there, which leads to my Calendly, where you can book a call with me to have a discussion, and then we can talk further. And of course, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. If you only speak Spanish, then that Calendly would probably not work, because that goes to me, and my Spanish is unfortunately very rudimentary. But you can just send an email to me at emil@tomorrowbiostasis.com, and then I can direct you to the right people. And of course, you find all that contact information on our webpage as well. Well, now, without further ado, thank you so much. Thank you to José for inviting me again. And I'm more than happy to answer questions after the next talk.
Thank you, Emil. That was fantastic to know all that is happening with you in Germany and in Switzerland, and how fast you are moving. It really is incredible. So I congratulate you for that. Also, for the news about the neuro preservation, which is only 60,000 euros. I think this is also very interesting. It's not just full body now that we have with Tomorrow Bio, but also neuro preservation. So
just small correction. It's not actually neuro, it's just brain. It's brain only. Right? Neuro usually means head, but we do brain only preservation.
Okay, fantastic. Well, anyway, this is a new option, really brand new from a few days ago. So we are happy to know about that. And now, let's move all the way to Australia, where it is close to 4 a.m. in the morning in Sydney. And then our friend Peter Tsolakides, that I have known for several years since he began with his initiatives about cryonics in Australia, that at the beginning were slow because he was looking for other members to finance the project. But finally, they got all the money to start the project, and they are basically ready in Southern Cryonics. Peter Tsolakides also, he's an expert on real estate planning and now life extension management here and beyond. So Peter, we are all ready to hear from you.
Right. Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello, Jose, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to join your webinar. Just make sure everybody can see what I'm seeing.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Look, my name is Peter Tsolakides, and I'm heavily involved, as Jose said, in the efforts to develop our cryonics capabilities in Australia. I think when I look at the progress everybody else has made and where they are, we're a very fledgling organization compared to everybody else. And you'll see that as I go through this little package, this presentation. Just something about Australia before we get started, a little bit of background and how it relates to cryonics. As you can see on this chart, the size of Australia is actually quite large. You can see the picture of Europe within Australia. So we're covering quite a lot of distance in Australia. As well as this large geographic area, our population is only 25 million. So we have a large area with a small population. The major centers, the major population centers are along the coastal areas, with the two largest being Sydney here and Melbourne here. And the distance between these two is about 1,000 kilometers. They actually have maybe around 10 million of the 25 million population of Australia. There is, however, a lot of interest in Australia regarding cryonics. Through all the things that we've done in developing what we're doing, we've had a lot of support from the media, and they're all very positive about what we have been doing. So far, so good. We haven't had any negative comments from the media. They've all been supportive. Australians generally are very open-minded and tend to accept new ideas quite readily. And the population is mostly secular and is relatively highly educated. So they're very open to things like cryonics and any new ideas. Let me just go through the journey that we've gone to. Jose said he's known me over quite a few years. Max as well has known me over quite a few years. We started this about 10 years ago. And what we first needed to do was find a suitable piece of land. That took quite a while. It had to meet a lot of different criteria, and therefore we did need to work really hard to find this land. The second thing that we needed to do was to work with the local governments. Cryonics was very new in Australia, so there was a lot of explanations needed to be given, a lot of relation buildings with the governments, various government groups, straight from the federal governments right down to the very local governments. And particularly we had to work with the state that we're in with their Department of Health. We were very fortunate, though, to talk with people who were very much on side with what we were doing, very supportive, and we did get a lot of help from them. We also needed to get a base of what we could call a founding membership. Jose alluded to this, so we could get funds to actually build the facility and proceed with the project. Let me just check. Southern Cryonics, yes, is a non-profit organization, and we believe we needed, at the beginning, 18 founding members, each paying the equivalent of about 40,000 Australian dollars, US dollars, 40,000 US dollars. That's about 50 to 70,000 Australian dollars, depending on what sort of founding members they were. We needed that to get the project moving. So we needed 18. In the end, we ended up with 34 of these founding members. So that made us very optimistic about what we could do and the potential demand for cryonics in Australia. We got roughly double what we'd expected to get. And everything that we've done, and I really want to sincerely thank Alcor and Cryonics Institute, because they have given us a lot of advisory help along the way. I think I visited both organizations, both very professionally run organizations, and they helped us a lot as we were moving forward with this project. So far, the work that we've done has been volunteer basis, with the exception of very specialized tasks such as the building, legal work, and some of the other things that needed to be done that volunteers really couldn't do. Once we start operating, and we are operating now, I'll talk about that later, we will shift towards a more commercial approach, though there will always be some voluntary aspect to what we do. We just population size and size of our organization couldn't do the sorts of things that perhaps you could do in Europe and in the US. Now, I'm going to now move on to the facility itself, what we ended up building in the end. Now, this is a picture of the facility. Let me just add that we don't have the fancy look yet that you just saw with what Emil had, and we're aspiring to something like that, because most of our attention to date, this has just started, by the way, most of our attention to date has been to getting things ready, and we have not really had a chance to spruce things up yet. This facility is located in a town called Holbrook, which is midway between Sydney and Melbourne. If you remember in that first chart, there were the two major cities in Australia. And we basically cover about 50% of Australia's population geographically. So even though we can cover all of Australia, we're really in the center of where the majority of the population is. It has convenient access to a large town with a good airport. We check the history of the location, and it's very low risk in terms of fire, which is very important for Australia. Flood, again, which is important for Australia because we do suffer a lot of those. And earthquake, which is not so critical because they're very rare in Australia. Very importantly, though, it's also on a major liquid nitrogen delivery route. We are only a few 1 kilometre away from a major highway there, and that's on the main delivery route for liquid nitrogen, which travels between the major cities there. It's quite a secure site with very little historical crime, and as a matter of interest, and this was pure coincidence and luck, the local fire brigade just happens to be built next door. The facility as it stands now is a warehouse style and can accommodate 40 patients. In its present state, it is fully functional. However, as phase 2, we plan to add some office space, but it's not critical for the operation. It'll just be for the administrative areas. The land that we're on is very large, so we can, with very easy expansions and with basically modular expansions to what we have there, we can accommodate up to 600. In fact, we could accommodate more than 600 patients. That's not in our plans for the foreseeable future, but we do have a lot of room for expansion. I just want to turn to the major equipment that we had to get to populate our facility. Again, people in cryonics will be very familiar with this, but the next step was to actually get the necessary equipment. We ended up completing the facility itself in very early 2020. So as you all know, the next few years were plagued with delays associated with the COVID virus. That meant we had delays in the equipment because of logistics problems, major shutdown of suppliers, and of course, illnesses. Until recently, we continue to suffer these delays, but we did manage to get everything in the end. We received our cryostat, which is what you see in the middle, which is essentially like a very large vacuum flask for the eventual storage of patients. Also, we obtained a very sophisticated cooling chamber from our Chinese friends, Yingfeng. That is to systematically bring the patient down to liquid nitrogen temperatures before being placed in the cryostat. We also have a large liquid nitrogen storage tank sitting outside the facility that you may have seen in the previous picture. That is so that we have ample supplies of liquid nitrogen to top up the cryostats over time. On top of that, we obtained, as you would expect, again, many minor pieces of equipment, such as ladders, pulleys, low oxygen, alarms, safety equipment, and many others. It was quite a job. It's interesting that just doing some of these took a lot more time than a lot of us imagined. I just want to shift quickly into something which we call our related organizations. Even though Southern Cryonics is the main organization we have developed over time, Southern Cryonics is only involved with the storage, the long-term storage of our patients. It is not involved with the other important areas that were covered before, which is the standby, stabilization, and transportation. To do this, we have a separate organization called CRIOPath. This is another non-profit organization, and CRIOPath is involved, as I said, with this SST, with the standby, stabilization, and transportation, and also part of the perfusion process. I was going to describe what standby means and what all the rest, but it was covered very adequately, very well, actually, by Max, much better than what I can cover it. So I'll jump that at the moment, but they are involved with that. To do it, we have used we've outsourced the work to a professional organization called Australian Blood Management. They are not related. They're not a cryonics organization. They're not related to any of our organizations as well. They're an independent organization, a professional established organization in Australia, which has perfusionists and medical practitioners on their staff. Most of what they do is conducting perfusions on patients at hospitals. They have portable ECMO, which is essentially heart-lung, similar to heart-lung machine capability, and they're experts in its use. They would be the team, or they would be the main team that would be a part of the standby team and then take the patient right through up to perfusion before being transferred to the facility for some of the final steps. They, as I said, they have the capability and they have experts. The next organization we show there is Cryonics Services Australia, which is an organization to allow what we call one-stop shopping for cryonics. One of the things I found when I first got involved with cryonics was just how many steps, how much paperwork, how many things, life insurance, legal work, etc. you needed to do. Cryonics Services Australia coordinates all this for you. It coordinates the life insurance, legal, estate planning, etc. The work itself is done by professionals, but it is handling the overall coordination, and it makes sure that the work done by these professionals is with cryonics needs in mind. Cryonics is very new to Australia, as you would expect, and a lot of these specialists, although very expert in their field, like life insurance agents, lawyers, accountants, estate planners, have no real understanding of the specific requirements that are needed for cryonics. Cryonics Services Australia helps there. The last of these organizations is called CRIOPRESERVACIÓN, which essentially is to do with long-term trusts. A special trust deed specific to cryonics was developed, and this is the basis of the work CRIOPRESERVACIÓN does, both as a trustee and as a coordinator of long-term trusts with major trustee organizations in Australia. Without this type of trustee organization, you would be very surprised how difficult it is to leave assets and funds to yourself for the long-term future. I kept this presentation fairly brief. I think we're new and we just like to announce that we're here. We have now started. We've trained, all the training and all the equipment testing has been conducted, and we're now ready to go. We officially opened what we call a soft opening on February the 1st. What this means is an opening basically for cryonics circles and the cryonics community. We are ready to go. We could take a patient if we needed to, but we're really just talking to the cryonics organization at the moment. What we want to do is to continue to improve our processes, enhance the looks of our facility. You know, as I said, it can certainly do the utility work that it needs, but it doesn't really have the look that we want it to have when we move to the more official opening. And we need to upgrade our security. We plan to formally open to the public and media in the second quarter of this year. We are now taking members, and the cost is around $140,000 US. I'm trying to do the exchange rate change, about $140,000, which can be covered by life insurance, which is very similar to what you saw before. The cost of the life insurance and the membership fees is about $50 US a month for the average member, and the average member is around the 40 years old bracket. That ends my presentation, and I really want to thank you for allowing me to share in our progress with you. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Peter. And it really is a pleasure to know all that you are doing and for so many years. And finally, you will be opening formally to the public as well. I just want to begin now with the questions and answers. We already have several questions that I have posted in the chat for the speakers. Many of them have their names. We have questions for Max, for Emil, and for Peter. So if you can read out your questions, but before, because we have a fantastic interpreter, a translator, Nicolas Chernansky, who is Brazilian, Argentinian, who is doing all the translation, and he is getting tired. So we will take first the questions in Spanish. You can do them live. You can raise your hand or just write the question, and we will make those questions first. Let's take 2 or 3 questions in Spanish first, and then we can move into English. So who wants to make a question in Spanish? We have several Spanish speakers here. Don't be shy. We are happy to have your questions and to have them answered by the 3 experts. So, okay, go ahead with your question, Tablet. Yes, Tablet, unmute yourself. Tableta, quítate.
¿Me escuchan?
Sí, sí.
¿Sí?
Sí, ok, vamos rápido.
Vale, buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Mari Carmen, vivo en España y bueno, mi pregunta es, me gustaría ir a Estados Unidos a visitar Alcor porque me gustaría pues hacerme miembro con ellos. Entonces, mi pregunta es, tengo que coger cita con alguien porque yo necesito a alguien que me atienda allí, pero que me atienda en español. Entonces, yo para preparar mi viaje, para poder ir allí y que alguien me explique todo lo que yo necesito preguntar para hacerme miembro, pues lo necesito hacer en español porque en inglés
perfecto, Mari
no
Carmen,
me enteraría de todo lo importante.
Ya hago la pregunta. Max, this question is for you. We have a person in Spain who wants to go to Alcor, but she only speaks Spanish. So do you have people in Alcor that can introduce her to Alcor to visit the facility in Spanish, please? You are muted, Max.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't actually work for Alcor anymore, so I can't answer that question officially. I would suggest that you send an email to the membership department, and the person there will know someone who speaks Spanish and can translate, presumably.
Okay, Mari Carmen, que Max ya no está oficialmente en Alcor, pero que sí, que escríbele y ellos tienen gente y que pueden ayudarte en español. O sea que no habría problema. Yo he estado en Alcor y yo he hablado en español. O sea, tengo experiencia.
Pero es que ya lo he hecho varias veces y no he tenido respuesta. He escrito varios correos electrónicos y nadie me ha contestado. Por eso, entonces, pues no sé si, a ver, también no sé si tengo que ir con una cita previa o si yo me planto allí, me van a atender y me van a escuchar pues lo que tengo que exponerles, claro, para que me aclaren todo.
Perfecto. Ok, yo te explico, yo he estado varias veces, eso no es un problema. Y María Entraigues es argentina y ella tiene su madre allá, ella también te puede ayudar. Pero vamos a otras preguntas. Any other questions in Spanish, please? Any other questions? Because we want to begin collaboration also, not only with the USA, but also with Europe and even with Australia. Okay, so more questions. Maybe a question for Emil in Germany, Switzerland, or even for Peter in Australia, in Spanish first. Any questions in Spanish? Okay, no questions in Spanish. So now let's move into the questions in English. Max, have you been able to read the questions? Because the first one was for you in the chat. And Romina, you want to ask a question later? Okay, so Max, you have a question. If you can read your question and answer, if you unmute yourself, please.
Was it the last question just asked? Because I had the translation turned on. I was hearing it in Spanish.
No, it is written. It is a written question from Alberto from Italy. Question for
right.
Max Moore. There are lots of open issues remaining, going from the ability to preserve information to the optimal perfusion, liquid, and process. To offer the standby facility and service is important, but research is also very important. Experiments with worms and liver freezing and transplantation are very old now, and I have not seen many improvements recently. Can you give us a brief overview of the research status on cryonics related issues?
Right. Well, I wouldn't say all of that research is very old, and this 10 years counts as very old. But yeah, there's a lot of work ongoing. I put some brief summary in there. There's between R&D, research and development, there's a lot of things going on in the development area, which is also very important, because without doing good development, you're not going to get good cryopreservation in the first place. So a lot of the standby and response, including the ability to do field cryoprotection for whole body patients, not something that's been done traditionally. That requires a lot of development work. Transport on liquid nitrogen is something that we're very interested in at Tomorrow Biostasis and other organizations. That would allow us to do the full cryoprotection locally, wherever you are, whatever state or country, and then to transport you on liquid nitrogen. That's very important, because what we've traditionally done, if we've done cryopreservation in the field, is to transport people on dry ice, which is about minus 78 degrees Celsius. That's actually not a good temperature to keep someone at for a very long time. It might sound very cold, but it happens to be in a particularly troublesome zone where you can get ice formation. So if we can drop people to liquid nitrogen, that's really good. So that's one area of development I think is quite important for whole body patients, at least. There's a lot of other stuff going on to improve things in the operating room and patient storage. But in terms of more basic research, there are two different efforts going on right now to make liquid ventilation workable. Liquid ventilation is the idea of rapidly cooling a patient by introducing a special fluid, a perfluorocarbon, into the lungs, which has a very large surface area. And that way you can cool the patient extremely rapidly. That's been something that people have been working on for 20 years or so without anything actually working yet. But now there's two competing different approaches to that, which we'll be doing at my organization and also at Alcor, so two different approaches. So that's one area. One thing I've been kind of impatiently waiting for is a study by Gregory Fay, one of the world's leading cryobiologists, from a patient we had a number of years ago, Dr. Stephen Coles, in which we took some brain samples and did some unusual studies. And from what I hear from Greg, the results were stunning, really, really good and very encouraging. And we've been rather impatiently waiting for Greg to get this paper published, and he keeps saying it will be. So that's one thing to look out for. That would be some pretty strong evidence, I think. There's a lot of other stuff going on. One thing that you'll be hearing more about is something called vitrifixation. It takes a little bit of practice to say that smoothly. That's a combination, as I kind of alluded to briefly, a combination of cryopreservation and chemical preservation. This would be particularly helpful in cases where there is a delay in getting to a patient, where you're not right there at the bedside. In those cases, after a certain period of delay, we see that no matter how well everything else goes, you won't get full cryoprotection of the brain. So in that case, it looks like using chemical fixation in combination with cryopreservation may produce much better outcomes, which will probably be for most people. There's the CT studies that, Emil also has a CT scanner, as does Alcor. The idea is to scan patients' brains and to see what the outcomes are depending on the variable. There's also a meta-analysis study where we're looking at the outcomes based on all kinds of different variables and trying to figure out how to improve the procedures, because there really hasn't been a lot of improvement in outcomes in too many years. So that's very important to do. There's other things like intermediate temperature storage, or ITS, which means storing patients at a slightly warmer temperature, maybe around minus 130 degrees C. And the idea of that is to prevent any fracturing of the tissues. So that's just a few of the things that could go on for quite a while, but there's actually a lot of research underway at Biostasis Technologies, where I'll be starting in March. We're behind a lot of those things. And I think there's also some collaborative research between some of the organizations to further this kind of research. So research is really critical to the success of cryonics, obviously not just from producing the outcomes and making good cryopreservations possible, but I think also for public acceptance. If cryonics organizations are going to grow better, they have to better show they're actually doing a good job, and they're doing a better job as time goes by. So it's a very important focus.
Okay, thank you so much, Max. We have some questions also for Emil. Emil, I think you have seen the questions, and actually you were even answering one. If you can read and answer those questions for you, please. Unmute yourself first.
Sure. I'm not sure what I actually. Okay, so one was here regarding the providing SST in other countries. Let's say someone wants to do first aid for a case that then would be taken over by us. If the legal questions of that have all been figured out. So for most countries, yes, of course, from country to country, there might be some differences. In short, either a funeral home on site or us, who we're also registered as a funeral home on the site, would be the legal entity who takes responsibility and liability, and then the people who do the job would be kind of, in quotation marks, subcontractors. But again, that might differ a bit. One other question that I answered was if someone is too old to get low-cost insurance, in most cases, low-cost term life insurance, if there are other funding options that are available. And yes, there are. Either, of course, there are kind of, whole life insurances, which kind of are, financial, like saving plan-like. And there's also the opportunity to fund with the kind of like a last will kind of setup. They're all a bit more complex, so that always would need to be an in-person discussion. We do not offer them just as with a click of a button on our webpage.
Okay, thank you, Emil. While we wait for some more questions, we also have one for Peter. Peter, did you see the question for you?
Yes, I saw two, one after the other there. The first one was a fairly straightforward one. Do we have a CT scanner? No, we don't. In fact, we hadn't yet thought about it as one of the primary pieces of equipment we need for what we're doing. It's something that we could think about down the road. The other question was for Southern Cryonics was, do you use ECMO in your body? Yes, we do. I may not have made it clear, but the organisation that we work with, Australian Blood Management, is an expert in this area. They do ECMO in their normal work. That is part of their normal work. They have portable ECMO machines, which they will take with them right to the hospital bed, and then wherever it's necessary, use it through the process, all the SST type process, and wherever it's necessary. So we very certainly do that, and we're considered, we're very lucky to have Australian Blood Management to work on that, because they are really knowledgeable in that area. That was the only two I saw.
Well, let me follow up with one, because Emil just announced that tomorrow Biostasis will have the brain option, only brain option. So have you considered that also eventually in Southern Cryonics? Because Alcor does it for a long time, and Emil announced it for tomorrow Biostasis. So how about you?
We're not thinking of the brain-only option, but we are thinking of a neuro option, which is similar to what, say, Alcor does. At the moment, I don't know whether we've got the technology to be able to do the brain option. We'd need to study it a lot more. But we are thinking about a neuro. Our base case is whole body, but we would do it on a case-by-case basis, considering neuros. There is another organisation called Neural Archives in Australia, which does brain only, but I don't know whether they do it to the same way as what Emil's organisation in Europe does it.
Okay, fantastic. We have some more written questions and some oral questions. Andrea, since you have some questions, you want to do them in person, connecting yourself, Andrea?
Yes. One question is to any speaker. What are the potential risks of a cryo and future revival between full body versus brain versus neuropreservation?
I mean, I can answer if no one wants to jump in. Okay, so of course for neuro or brain only, a part of the body would either need to be recreated, right? Think of, for example, organ 3D printing, or it would need to be some artificial body thing. And of course, then there's always some discussion about instantiating the consciousness and memory in silico, right, in a computer or something like that, right? Of course, that is, you know, very speculative. None of these options are you know, currently possible. But then again, the whole thing is currently not possible. So it's imaginable that that might work in the future. So I don't think there's any like fundamental big difference between these two options. This book was mentioned a couple of times, Cryostasis Revival from Robert Freyes. There's actually a chapter on that, how the different revivals between neuro or whole body might differ in regards to costs and complexity. I think the high level argument would be that I would always suggest to do whole body if it's not a money thing. Because if you have whole body, you can always go back, right? You can always go to brain or head only. The other way around, you can't, of course. But from a scientific, from a medical standpoint, I'm not aware of any part of the rest of the body that I would say is super important. Right. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I would add it to what Emil says. I agree with everything Emil said. I think what you have to realize is that your body, unless you die early on in an accident or something, your body's going to be in pretty awful shape if you live very long. And so, you know, you don't want to come back in an old body. So basically the entire body's going to have to be regenerated anyway. So there's not really a whole lot of difference between keeping just your brain and regenerating a body and having everything else repaired. It's actually arguable whether one will be easier than the other to start fresh. It's not too clear. But as Emil says, I was going to say the same thing. In Robert's book, Cryostasis Revival, there's a very detailed analysis of what the cost would be in the repair time. So you might want to take a look at that. But yeah, I don't think there's any crucial difference between the two. And also I agree with Emil's suggestion that even if you have, you know, if you're perfectly happy with the neuro option, you might sign up with a whole body, or at least make sure you have enough funding for whole body, because as prices go up over time, it might be that you can no longer afford whole body, but then you have the funding in place and probably more than enough for, you know, a brain preservation or neuropreservation.
Thank you. And another question. If a person signs a plan of cryopreservation with a company and happens to die in another continent, there will be some agreements between companies to which can be transported the person back to the country where signed the contract of the preservation.
I don't think there's any formal agreements right now in place, but there's been some discussion of that, and that seems like an obviously sensible thing to do at some point. You'd have to figure out, you know, the funding of that and the transfer of the payments. But I think obviously that's a good idea, at least until Emil expands and takes over the world. We're going to have some cooperation between the local organizations. Yeah, again, that's not something that's currently in place, but I think it's something that needs to be pursued. It might need, you know, one thing this new group of organizations that I'm part of wants to do, apart from improving procedures, is to raise the standards of all the organizations and maybe, you know, at some point certify them. And one thing that might be on there is to say this is both certified as having good standards and with a collaborative relationship with other organizations. So that if you're traveling to, you know, Africa or Asia or Europe or the US, there are things in place to rescue you more efficiently than relying on a long distance organization. So that's really something for hopefully the near future.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any more questions live in English or in Spanish? Or we have a couple of more questions, I think, in the chat, if you want to react to that. Actually, there is a question by David Wood, who is saying that now that Tomorrow Bio might start providing services in parts of the USA, what is the reaction from Alcor and Cryonics Institute? So, Emil, maybe you can comment on that. What have you talked to them, or what is their reaction?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so far we've been always friendly collaborating. I mean, some friendly, you know, friendly competition, I think is pretty helpful for everything. To my knowledge, there is no hard feelings. Of course, we also said that, at least not with current leadership, but with prior leadership of Alcor. Of course, we discussed it with Max in the past that we might at some point do this, even though it wasn't really clear when at that point yet. Also with Patrick, and of course, I also told current leadership. I'm not aware of any, you know, any hurt feelings.
Fantastic. Very good. Okay, some more questions or comments, please. No more questions or comments? Anyway, we are going to have a session in Spanish, remember, on April 2nd. Oh, we have 2 questions. Okay, but remember, in April 2nd, we are going to have a session about cryonics with 3 experts from Argentina, from Spain, from the USA. But anyway, let's hear from Jordi and then from Javier, please. Jordi?
Thank you, Jose. Congratulations on the event. It's been fantastic. My question is about what do our speakers think about the possibility to have like an international cooperation effort? Because I think it's very important that if we travel nowadays, if we go to Europe, Australia, Africa, Asia, anywhere, something should happen. Then if all the cryonic centers around the world are coordinated, then they could help each other in order to seize the patient with SST protocols until the patient is carried out to the place where he's supposed or she's supposed to be cryopreserved. So I think that I would like to encourage and get, like an engagement in order to reach some international cooperation efforts for this to happen, because sometimes it can be very tricky, for instance, to take one body from one region of the world to the other. Whereas if all this is already previewed and foreseen, then we can have some margin of effort. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is highly important. As we discussed many times before, SST and that's the most complex part, and no one can really cover the world. That's one of the reasons why we don't yet offer membership or don't accept members in the US, because there's no way where we can cover this well. And if there's delay between pronouncement, or more precisely circulatory arrest and cool down, the quality just drops like crazy. Every minute is crucial, right? So collaboration there is absolutely required. From our end, we're super open to it. In fact, we might have a bit of an easier time to do it for the US, because there are, of course, organizations who are kind of independent companies, independent organizations that we could out-contract with if someone of our members dies in the US. Yeah, but in general, I very much agree. There should be more collaboration, and these talks are ongoing, but kind of a bit slowly maybe, but I think in the future, there will be significantly more collaboration.
Okay, very good. We agree with that. Emil and Jordi, we need more collaboration all over the planet. So Javier has a question also. Javier, do you want to speak? Or I see that you have written your question, which is basically, what do you think about the cryopreservation technique created by Boris Rubinsky using biophysics and without cryoprotectors? Is that okay, Javier? Is that your question? So I don't know if you are aware about Boris Rubinsky and his cryonics technique, Max. Or,
I'm not familiar with that. I'm just looking at his webpage now about his isocoric supercooling. I'm not actually familiar with that, so I'll take a look at it. Thanks for the reference.
And Emil, were you familiar with that, Boris Rubinsky?
No, I'm not aware of that anything can be implemented there. My understanding is this only till minus to minus 40. Like I'm not sure. No. So if the question can be, if there's someone can elaborate what exact technology they mean, then I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm not familiar either. So Javier, if you want to expand on that.
We'll post something about it on Cryosphere, and we can all take a look at it and discuss it.
Right. Okay, so I guess we are already 1 hour and a half, 3 fantastic speakers in English, and we will have a session in Spanish on April 2nd with 3 Spanish-speaking experts, okay? So you have to join on April 2nd, our Spanish and Latin American public. So if there is one final question, we will take it. Otherwise, it will be until next time. Any final questions or comments?
I have a final statement I'd like to make very briefly.
Please, please.
Just to point out to the people there, especially in Europe, that if you join a Cryonics organization very soon, in the next year or so, you will be a pioneer. You will be having bragging rights in the future. You'll be one of the very tiny few people. And in the future, when this is a common thing, you're going to say, I was there first. You can be very smug about it and boast at it at parties. And also, very importantly, you'll be setting an example for other people. If you are open about your arrangements and you talk about this, you help to spread the idea, which improves your chances and those of those you love and other people as well. So go ahead and make those arrangements as soon as you can.
Fantastic, Max. I totally agree. And there is one final comment here from David Wood. He says, are there any drawbacks to cryocrastination? That is, when someone thinks that they are unlikely to die in the next few years, so they delay sorting out cryonics arrangements. So who wants to talk about cryocrastination?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's obviously the major downside is that you could die and permanently and never come back. People often cryocrastinate because they think it's a big hassle to sign up. It's actually not as difficult as people think. It's like many other things in life that there's piles of paper that you haven't gone through, and then you realize, oh, you sit down and do them. It doesn't take as long as you thought. So people put it off thinking it's difficult. Not that difficult, really. Also, they put it off thinking, well, I'm fairly young and healthy. I don't need this right now. I could put it off. But I can tell you many, many horrible stories of people who did that and then left it too late. And either they didn't get cryopreserved at all, or else there was a mad scramble and rush to try to get them preserved, to arrange the funding and the contracts at the last minute. That is not the way you want to do things. We've had cases like that. We had, I can tell you, a member who's, I think in his late 80s, early 90s, who was quite well off, but decided he didn't want to pay a few $100s a year in membership dues. And then at the very last minute, people contacted us to try to sign him up. I think in that case, it was unusual that he did actually get signed up, but it did produce a delay in starting proceedings. So cryocrastination is pretty deadly, and I strongly recommend that you don't do that. You take your actions and at least get your funding in place, because that's pretty critical. If you're funding by life insurance, which the vast majority of people do, if you leave that till later in life, you may suddenly find that you're uninsurable. So at the very least, if you don't sign up, at least get your funding in place, I would suggest.
Well, fantastic. We take that advice. Max, thank you so much. And also the advice and the comments, the ideas from Emil and from Peter. So I just want to tell you, thank you so much for joining us in this special session from Madrid Singularity. And we want to invite you also so that you learn Spanish. You have time to learn Spanish for April 2nd. We will have a session about cryonics in Spanish on April. So with Rodolfo Goya from Argentina, Ramon Risco from Spain, who is connected now, by the way, and Maria Entregues Abranson, who lives in the USA and who cryopreserved her mother, the first Latin American who is now in Alcor. So anyway, thank you so much for all of you for your participation. And we are looking forward to have you on April 2nd for the second session on cryonics in Spanish. And to all of you, my friends, live long and prosper. Live long and prosper.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, José Luis.
Nice day.
Thanks, José. Bye-bye.